Welcome to the Social Impact Level Up podcast. This is where we blur the lines between business, nonprofit, and impact. I'm your host, Wendie B, and in season 3, we're redefining success for social entrepreneurs looking to grow their revenue. If you have reality-changing ideas, this is the place for you. Let's jump right into today's episode. How do you discover your purpose and make sure that as a change agent, you're on the road that you should be? This is a really fundamental question that we've asked of a lot of people in this podcast, but I'm excited to have a very free-flowing conversation with Bill Correll. Bill is a new friend who I was introduced to through the LinkedIn platform and proof that social media works to bring like-minded people together. We had a wonderful coaching conversation the other day that I very much appreciated and said, Bill, jump on the podcast with me and let's have a chat. So, Bill, I want to welcome you to the show and welcome to the Social Impact Level Up podcast. And I just want to ask you, who are you and how do you make an impact?
Well, Wendie, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this, spending some more time with you. Who am I? I guess the short version is I'm just a guy that's been kind of a consummate volunteer most of my adult life. Been on probably 20 or 30 boards over the last 40 years. I'm a great grandfather, not 4 generations. I'm just a really good grandfather. Let's put it that way. I'm married to my beautiful bride, who I met in a dream when I was 12 years old, and then met her in real life at a dorm party at UConn in 1974. So we just celebrated our 50th Christmas and New Year together. I think other than that, I think what I'm kind of known for is being upbeat, positive, and generating goodwill, bringing people to a conversation about what are we going to do, that's good for humanity, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was impressive with how many organizations that you've supported as a board member. Even at the same time, it was just astounding to me as a community member thinking about how many people are not engaged in their communities and how people like you are like ultra engaged. And so, let's just start there. And what brought you to want to give back? Or like, was that always something that was part of your journey, or you always intrinsically were motivated by it?
So we could probably spend a couple of hours just kind of really diving into that. But I had a really good buddy who was he was a Marine in Vietnam, and he became quality assurance manager at an electronics company I was working at. And he told me, he said, Bill, work flows to the competent person in the organization. And so I got used to people inviting me to take on different roles. I mean, I got promoted very quickly, became a leader of men by the time I was 25 years old, in manufacturing companies. Then I got an opportunity, to join a Y board in 1980. I had just become a supervisor at a company called Rogers Corporation, and they supported, being out in the community and volunteering. So kind of an upstart. 26 years old on this board with all of these town leaders and everything. I just really thought I was playing way over my head at that point, right? So I would say that I saw some really good things that we were able to do. We saved the Y for another 10 years or so. And then, of course, I got involved by being invited to come to other meetings. And then they would see, that I had a head on my shoulders and for the most part could take criticism. I think that's one of the things that separates people who are leaders from people who are trying to be a leader, if you will. So with that said, I got to work with people in business who worked for and with me, who had much more education than I had much more time in grade. I had 50 and 60-year-old people working for me from the time I was 22, 23 years old. So that was a desirable thing. I got along with everybody. So I went from the Y organization, and then I got invited to an international management council upstart as a result of that. And then board for the hospital, and then Salvation Army, and on it went. And then I went to a meeting for downtown revitalization in 1994. I met this beautiful man who was an under mayor in Hartford. Nick Carbone was his name. And he had this cockamamie idea about getting state legislation pushed through so that we could rehabilitate all of these neighborhoods in the state of Connecticut and bring them back online again. And so I got really up to my eyeballs there. But you can imagine trying to get prepared for maybe as many as 8 or 10 meetings a week wasn't terrible for me because I came out of manufacturing and I really had to be prepared when I wasn't prepared, and prepared to say, I don't know, and go get the information. But when you're in a position and people are continuously asking for more, it's hard to say no. And especially if they really like what you're doing and they do follow, the lead. So I've been blessed to be able to bring that to groups of people for quite a long time.
Are you tired of investing in courses that you don't finish? Wondering where to get on-demand professional development to grow an impact organization? I just made your search so much easier. Head to my online store, learngrowthrive.wendyvillos.com. This is where you can access our learning paths, a curated set of on-demand resources for grant writing, social business, holistic business, and nonprofit growth. If you're curious what's inside each learning path, explore them now at learngrowthrive.wendyvillos.com. Yeah, it's almost like when you're competent, people do give you more work and find your value. But then at some point, you can overtax yourself and lose your competency simply because you can't keep up. You kind of warned me about that. Don't join too many boards.
Well, here's the thing. When you start feeling like, the parts of your life are out of balance again, it's time to kind of examine it. But what saved my life was kind of a distinction that I came up with around 95 or 96. It was like, Bill, you can't possibly be prepared. So just show up and be effective. Let's see if we can play that game for a while. That seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah. Being effective is good, and you were very good at giving me examples of what that could look like in a fly. Just being present and really focused on what is asking questions and leading the conversation. Like there's some really easy ways to be effective.
Yeah, and the other part of it too, Wendy, which I don't think many people, especially at the age that I was, I couldn't have expressed it to you this way then. But I think for the most part, it was just being present and being in the conversation and not trying to remember the next question that I wanted to ask, but just interact with what was actually going on. And that's turned things into a lot of fun.
I've actually been told that some people, I do that too, and I just kind of show up and contribute, right? Because it's all humans interacting in a conversation. But I've been told that some people are very intimidated by being in group settings or speaking up in group settings or even having an opinion in those kinds of places where everybody's watching you as you're talking, especially at a board meeting or something like that. So it's maybe not as easy for them to express or to lead the conversation or even to be present
Yeah.
because they're trying to figure out what to say next, because of this fear and anxiety. And I thought it's a really interesting perspective because I don't have that. And I imagine you don't have that either.
Well, I don't remember having it, but it's been a while. But it's that old theory that people would rather be shot than public speak, and sometimes that means just three people in a room is public speaking in their mind. The butterflies get people kind of acting weird, if you will.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard when you're trying to contribute to a conversation if people are, not not available and present. They're still there, but they're just not able to participate. And I really love what you said about different, like you were in so many different types of organizations, which now you still do some IT consulting, some other things, but you also are a sage of information for people who are in the nonprofit sector. And I know you mentioned in our last conversation that you like to focus on larger nonprofits or medium-sized nonprofits. So I wanted to ask you about that world. What do you see as being the things that they're paying attention to right now, or they should be paying attention to right now in 2025?
Well, if they're not constantly replanning the future, they're in the wrong business. Because we are in a changing environment every single year. We went through 4 or 5 years where there was just plenty of money available in multi-year grants, as you're well aware, a lot of which were addiction centric or post incarceration, reintegration into the workforce and that sort of thing. That kind of dried up. They didn't vote for anything new this past year in multi-year grants going into the future. So that's going to be a big deal for the folks in Congress this year, and I think they'll step up and they'll make it happen. But I want to say also that the small business owner has to be sure enough of a few things in life that they can take advice from anybody in the building. I've been around some folks that couldn't actually tell them much of anything at all. And then there were other people who just show up and say, Bill, what the hell am I doing wrong? And I can work with those kind of people all day long, but they're the ones that get things done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really is about what actions are you going to take, and especially in a constricted economy, and then also so where they're looking at things like people having less discretionary money to donate out of pocket, and then less money coming from federal to state pipelines. Then, as
Yep.
you said, people who had been used to sectors that had available funding, multi-year funding from the federal government, and also a lot of grants that were related to DEI initiatives and other pieces of equity work will now be in jeopardy as well. So I think there's a lot of places that people are scared, but I see opportunities for innovative ways for money to be exchanged, particularly between business and nonprofit. And I think that there is a lot of space for us to look at other options like crowdfunding or even just how we do live streaming fundraising, like Jerry Lee Lewis telethon level, you know,
Yeah.
to be really innovative. And I just curious, what do you think could be innovative in this space?
So I'll tell you what, the first thing I do with anybody that I sit down, where are you leaving fee for service on the table and not taking advantage of it? In your vertical, you're helping certain people do certain things. You can actually do training for jobs going into local companies and that sort of thing. You can get small mini grants for a few $1,000s that would allow you to, to kind of move that along a little bit. But where it's more interesting is for me to just put that on the table and then brainstorm with whoever is there. Sometimes it's the people that are the caregivers, or case managers, along with the so-called executive director, who typically is somebody who's about 31 or 32 years old. This might be the second or third job that they've ever had, usually college educated and well spoken, but beyond that they don't know their backside from a hole in the ground in terms of how to do this business thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have felt that at some point in our career, right? With some job or at some role, right?
And they're done
Um,
many times, yes.
yeah. You figure it out and you get better at it, and then eventually you realize you are actually really good at it and you're better than you thought. We talked about it in the top of the episode, but these are the same people who are those folks who are very passionate, right? All of the people in the social impact space, they're typically, I find, driven intrinsically by a desire to make change in some sort of way. And if not
Yeah.
just in general, as a generalist who picks up different topics to work on, or as someone who's really thinking about specific ways to make an impact and then is fueling through that. So, what is your advice for these people who are trying to follow their passion, but obviously it's very difficult in this sector?
Well, see, here's the thing, and we don't talk about this very much as a culture, but almost all of that passion for people who are in the not-for-profit space is coming from some sort of grief, okay? Personal, shared through a family member, in a situation where something was called for, but there were no resources available, and they said, this shall not stand. And so my advice to them always, we've had that, kind of funny conversation about what your why is, which goes back to Napoleon Hill and the 7 habits of highly effective people begin with the end in mind and all that. It's all good. But see, what really is important is if you can identify, name, and embrace that sense of loss or that grief, where you had a moment of failure to be, and you're not going to let that happen again, ever, ever, ever. And I find that when people can really get in tune with that, at least from a flavor standpoint, even if they don't have great languaging for it, that gives them an opening, to listen more and to take more on board and say, well, if you wanted to do this, how would you do it? And do it to everyone in the building, because they're all brain resources.
That's interesting. I never thought about it from that perspective. I'm going to have to give my why some more thought in that realm because I don't know the true root of it. That's a very interesting thing. I think most of the listeners know that I first chose a career in helping when I was in 8th grade after being a peer mentor and realizing that there was a young woman in my class who was suffering from abuse and didn't have an adult she could talk to. So she was talking to me, trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to talk to an adult. And then I realized, oh, I enjoy helping people through whatever kinds of problems they may have that have ultimately ended up me helping helpers, right? Which is what I do now. But it does compound, I think, over time, but there is probably a root there. I'll have to give that some thought.
Yeah, I think it gets you into the right part of the stadium anyway. And again, to me, having a sentence that describes a situation emotionally for a 5-minute period doesn't really mean anything unless it juices you up every single day of the week. And I think sometimes it's a person. I think sometimes it's a something you've never been before, but you really want to be. There for everyone, it's a different metaphor. And when people can identify with something that is gnawing at them that they don't have an answer to, and say, "Hey, we're going to turn that into fuel. That is going to be the energy that carries me through to this big goal that I have."
That's helpful, because I think in processing that further, then the feeling that I had was no one like her should ever go unserved.
That's a great sentence.
So whether it's her or any other person who is in need, if I can help the helpers, then they won't go unserved. So maybe that is the root. I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, no extra charge. And I'll tell you what,
Thanks, Bill.
actually it's a measurable thing. You can actually tell whether you're making a difference inside of that sentence. And that allows you so much more room to create so many more sentences hanging off of that. Sentences that you get from other people who say, well, is it kind of like this or is it kind of like that? And then before you know it, you're like this group of people that have got this mutual attraction of what you love about each other that's going to help you just change the world and make it a better place.
And I think that change makers do sort of need to come together and have that synergy and fuel, because it can get, like I said, quite draining depending on what you're working on and what's going on with your organization. But also just in knowing that there are people who are doing good and being inspired by the other work. And
Yeah.
I'm curious how you've been able to connect with other change makers.
Well, I haven't had to look very hard. They're everywhere. And for me, again, I've got a list of some really powerful distinctions that have worked for me over the years. I've always looked at it as sharing power. It wasn't about knowledge, because you and I both know knowledge is something that's not terribly useful to people. One of the things that I do in a group of folks, I go, so how many of you here know how to lose weight? And almost everybody's hands go up. And I go, so and how many of you would consider yourself overweight? And about half the people's hands go up. And I say, well, how is that knowing how to do it working out for you? And so the point isn't, the speech part of it. The point is what actions are required and necessary for the change to actually be made in the world. And I have 3 levels of conversation. I think I may have mentioned to you that one of them has to do with representational language. We have over, I don't know, 300 distinct languages and probably several thousand dialects all around the world. That's just like what's a chair, and what's a light and that sort of thing. And then the next level is going to be the one that's nonverbal, that we share communication with other live beings such as cats and dogs and people, where you can smile at somebody and I don't care what language they speak, they're going to smile back at you. That's just how it works. And then the third one is object to object. That's like, smacking your head against a rock or something like that. That's not representational. And it certainly is not, an emotional, immediate response to something. That is physically what happens out in the world. If you think that you can walk on water, good luck with that. You may or you may not be successful, or you think you can cross traffic when there's people zooming along at 70 miles an hour, they'll cancel your vote. So you've got to be respectful of what physically is going on in the world, and then set your goals around what you can visibly measure and change in terms of the physical blood and guts world.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk in the federal government. I remember one of my colleagues was an evaluator, and he would always say it has to be about, like, can you measure it? Damn it, because if it's not measurable, I don't want to hear about it. And if your metric is a bad metric or not representative of the true change or transition value that's supposed to be there, then it's really not a worthwhile thing for you to even tell me about.
Yeah, evidence-based theories they're helpful.
Yeah, and some people, really are very scrutinizing, maybe more so than I am, about what counts and what doesn't. So,
I really love that, and one of the metaphors that I use is the whole method of the scientific method, which is starting off with some sort of a hypothesis and then putting in an action plan, then doing the work and then measuring the outcome, not so you can have an answer, so you can have a better question than the one you asked before you started that segment. So life for me is about a series of better questions. When you get to the point where you think you have an answer, the conversation is done. You're not going to grow from there. So you really got to be how can I present a new question for myself that's going to wake me up tomorrow morning, like I did this morning at about 2:45 a.m. I got 6 hours of sleep. That was fine. But I just really had a lot of things that I wanted to wrap my mind around today.
I love it. And this is one of those things. And I super appreciate that. And I think what you were talking about goes back to a conversation I have a lot on this podcast too, is that's really how my theory of sustainability works too. You're moving towards the next iteration of that vision. And again, if you're thinking about it from an evidence-based perspective, following your theory of change, when you get to a point in your theory of change, you got to get a new theory. Like you need to come up with a new reason why you're moving forward and what that looks like in the new reality versus where you were when you started the theory of change before.
Well, what I love about that, Wendie, implicit in what you're saying is that you are aware and you tell the truth about what your outcomes actually are, because those outcomes, when they fail, are actually more useful than the ones that succeed. You don't learn an awful lot from success, but if you're really open-minded and you start the day out knowing I've got a couple of things that could happen here, I could fail dramatically, or I could win dramatically, or I could really have nothing to show for it at the end of the day. A big failure sometimes is actually a great prize.
Yeah, learning from every failed relationship will only help you build stronger relationships. So I appreciate that. And I really want to ask you the season question. There's a couple questions I ask every guest. So we're getting into that time of the podcast. Could you tell us about a time that you have redefined success in your journey and what that looked like for you to do that? Or what was your new kind of way of viewing what success was?
I think the best one that I can share with you is just between you and me, right? Don't let this get out.
Yeah, don't let anybody else hear this one.
I got crushed in the downturn of 2008 to 2011 when Barack Obama was sworn in January of 2009. All my lines of credit were shut off to zero. So I went from having a pretty significant set of assets, about 20 different retail rental properties. We did vacation rental homes. I had commercial space, all this sort of thing. And now I'm funding it out of pocket because all of the banks shut everything down to outstanding balances. So that was fun. And so I struggled along with that for about 2 or 3 years before I finally went in and sat down with an attorney and said, how do I do this, reorganization thing? And so that was where I really had to make a complete decision that no, I've got all of these things and they're no longer generating me the lifestyle I've always dreamed of. They are now a millstone around my neck, and I'm going to drown if I don't do the appropriate thing. And so that was a complete redesign, to make the decision to keep going, because I could have declared chapter 7, but I really didn't think that, we were going to be in that bad of a recession for that long. It was probably going to be a year or two, right? So yes, I had to redesign my whole idea of what success was. And now I am very, very proud of having completed that long process and, earned my way out of a chapter 11, which is it's a reorganization that's typically for corporations with a lot of assets and stuff. I happen to have a little bit more than the minimum, so I couldn't do, the easy one, which would have cost me about $3,000. I had to do the hard one, which cost me close to $90,000.
That's a pretty big margin between easy and hard.
Yeah. Talk about redefining what success looks like. Sometimes it was just like, how long can I hold on to this property before I have to either give it back or sell it?
Yeah.
It's a very sobering thing, to have the whole world change on you like that. And I'm a little bit concerned that we might be heading into another one of those periods as well. So we've got to continuously ask better questions.
Yeah, and always thinking about there is a solution. Like what I hear much in your story is something that it resonates with me all the time. Is you may not really understand or know the solution, but if you look around in your network and in the assets and resources that you do have available, there is a solution to you, and you need to ask for that solution. Whether that's philosophically asking or it is really asking someone to help, you do have something available to you to solve the problem.
Yeah, I would call it almost an alchemy. Invention is a huge tool. That you don't know is not a problem. That you don't know is blessed. Okay. But when you don't know, you're pretty much screwed. Okay. So invent.
That's the problem I solve is the people who come to me who don't know what they don't know. And it's a good place to be sometimes because you don't you could be a thought partner, but then also be part of the solution, right? That people already had inside of them anyway. And so this last question, there's two more questions I want to ask you, but this first one is because you mentioned in our first conversation you're later in your career. You probably have as many years in business and nonprofit support as I do on this earth, and you are just a wealth of knowledge to people. So, how do you maintain your well-being at this point in your life to continue to show up and serve the people that you're serving now?
Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I've got 2 podcasts. We're up to almost 190. My next episode for Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, will be 190. The other one, which I absolutely love, this is one of the neatest things I've ever done in my life. It's Simple Questions for 100 People. And I interview, people from all walks of life. So other folks, I've got the best wife. I won the wife lottery a whole long time ago. But I got to tell you, I get daily rewards from family and friends and loved ones on Facebook, and folks that I get out and about with. But I'm pretty open, as you can probably tell. If you ask me a question, I'm going to answer you, or I'm going to say no, I'm not going to answer that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I take care of myself on a daily basis by doing some of the things that I want and need to. Plus, I like playing guitar.
Oh, that's fun. That's a good hobby. Yeah. And I think that's a great perspective on social wellness because we don't talk about that aspect enough that the connections that we have on social media, yes, they might seem trivial or surface level at some point, but there are really genuine connections that I've made online with folks, even like the person who introduced us, America's Supermom, Lachelle. Amazing, amazing person. I have a very deep connection with Lachelle. You have a very deep connection with
I
Lachelle.
love her
I've never
completely.
met the woman in person. She's
Nor have
fantastic.
I, but she's a force.
One of my favorite people on this earth, right? And so I love it. And so it's just great to have the connections with other people through social media as well that have a connection with your friends. I'm grateful to you for coming to the podcast and all the knowledge that you've dropped with us today. And I wanted to just ask, you mentioned a couple of your shows where people can find you on podcasts. They're on LinkedIn, you're on Facebook. But what should people be connecting with you about? Why are they finding you and where should they go?
I don't care. I am in love with 8 billion people, most of whom I haven't met yet. So bring whatever you got. I'm always up for a conversation, either something that I walk away with or something you walk away with. And maybe we just make a second date, and get back to chat with each other again. But I'm the kind of person that folks open up to very quickly, and they share things about themselves that they wouldn't normally share, probably with anyone else, because I think they know, from jump, that I'm a trustworthy guy, and that I really honor, every human being that I'm around.
And you're just a hoot to talk to. So I think people would enjoy the conversation. And not many people, it's like you go to my LinkedIn DMs and you'll actually find me and I'll jump on the call with you. But Bill is one of those people. So take advantage. So appreciate you being here with us. Thank you so much for being part of the Social Impact Level Up podcast. We really appreciate having you. And to all the listeners, come back for another episode and we'll have another amazing guest just like Bill.
Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we look forward to having you come back. If you're curious about something we shared, make sure you check in the show notes below. And do you want the secret to make your nonprofit or business more sustainable and more profitable? Hop into my Learn, Grow, Thrive University, where I give you exclusive access to resources, mini courses, and templates for free. All you need to do is sign up at wendybelos.com/university. See you next episode.